Hey, hello, this is Professor Game, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who bring us the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration to help us in the process of getting students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I work at IE Business School Publishing, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials. We're today with Scott Reinke. He is the coordinator for the Ball State Achievements at Ball State University. Ball State Achievements is an awesome new approach to retention of at-risk students through mobile gamification. Scott has always been passionate about games and wants to leverage their power in higher education. Scott, are you prepared to engage?
I am good to go.
Good to hear. Scott, so let's get started today with today's interview. The first thing that we wanted to know is, how does a regular day with Scott look like?
Sure. So I run the Achievements program here at Ball State. So my day is pretty much filled with tending to the program in multiple ways. Most of my day is spent communicating with students, seeing if they have any issues in the app, or with buying store items or completing achievements, or just generally seeing, what they'd like to see in the app. A big part of my job is to coordinate different areas of campus to get their programming in the app. So I spend a lot of time talking to other directors and other divisions here at the university. When I have some downtime between that, I usually spend that researching gamification and games, watching YouTube videos on game design, reading articles, and also trying to hone my skills. I'm kind of a jack of all trades, so I try to keep up to speed with certain development and design techniques, as well as just writing for conferences or papers, designing for the app, or just generally, coming up with marketing campaigns for the students to try to get them engaged.
Scott, you mentioned the Ball State Achievements app. Can you give us a quick overview of what this app looks like and what is it about?
Yeah, so the Ball State Achievements app was launched in fall of 2014. The idea was that for low-income students, there is a higher impact for them engaging with the university, meaning that they see higher degrees of success the more engaged they are at the university. And we were trying to move the dial on their retention rates, so retaining them from freshman to sophomore year and beyond, to try to get better four-year graduation rates.
So you found out that if they were more engaged with the university, they actually had a higher tendency to remain in the university, right?
Yeah, and that's a pretty obvious thing, I think. That makes sense. But what the research we found showed was that for any student, that's true, but it's actually even more impactful when you look at lower ability, low income students.
Awesome. So the app, what it does is engage the students with the university, and what, again, very general, can you tell us what it does to keep them engaged with Ball State?
Yeah, so in the app, we have a bunch of different goals and tasks called achievements. And those can be anything from exploring campus landmarks, finding instructional buildings, meeting with your academic advisor, going to football games, getting all A's and B's. I mean, we really try to encompass everything at the university. So when they complete those achievements, they get a currency called bennies, and they can use that currency to purchase real stuff from the Ball State bookstore, tech store, and rec center.
So stuff that actually costs cash, they can buy it with bennies.
Yes.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
So now that we know what you're doing, what the app looks like, we want to go back a bit into your history and for you to tell us the story of maybe the worst application of game thinking or gamification that you've ever participated in. And here you don't have to say any names if you don't want to, if you have any NDAs or anything. We want more, the main thing here is the experience. What happened and what are the key learnings from that?
Sure. So I do have a story, and it's kind of a happy ending story. It's a comeback story, I guess. But
the best
so
ones.
I worked in So I worked in a restaurant. I've worked in a lot of restaurants, but I worked in one restaurant in particular, and they had a contest every year to sell margaritas, alcoholic drinks.
Okay.
I was a server at this restaurant, and it was a really great contest. It really got me engaged. The way it worked was if you sold a regular margarita, you got like 10 points. A specialty was, I think, 30. And then their top shelf signature margarita was 50 points. And what was interesting was they split people up into teams. There were team leaders on each team. Each shift they would run, special games like bingo and hangman and things like that to try to encourage those like short-term, push sales for particular shifts. As well as, they would have shift meetings where they would announce, so and so's in the lead, this team's in the lead, this person sold a whole bunch on Saturday. And then ultimately, some winners would win. I think there was like a trip to Florida or something was like the big sales prize. And it went really, really well. And for me, it encouraged me to sell more. Encouraged pretty much everybody there. You felt happy for other people.
So very competitive bunch, I guess.
Yeah, well, it was competitive and it was cooperative because you had your teams. And there really was a feeling of being on the same team and all together. And they would even show the numbers between our store and other stores. And it was just really well designed. The best gamification, the best game design, I think, is simple and
Sure.
and doesn't necessarily use technology. Tag is one of the most fun games ever made. And it's super simple.
Zero
Um,
technology.
yeah, or thumb wrestling, rock, paper, scissors, and the floor is lava. And so here's where things went bad. About a couple years later, they went under new ownership, and there were some changes made to a lot of things around the store. And one of the things that they changed was they changed that campaign, that month of competition, and they changed it to where I can't. This was years ago, so I can't remember the exact details, but I know they changed the point structure to where certain drinks were all the same. There weren't as many kind of shift meetings where they talked about who was on the leaderboards and everything. It kind of just got whittled down to something that was printed out.
So you got
And
less like immediate feedback. The feedback loop was not as good as before.
yeah, there was less feedback. There was less strategy involved with wanting to sell particular drinks, and that eventually kind of came through in the numbers. People were less enthused to participate. I don't think they hit the same quota that they did in years prior, and it really, at face value, it looked like exactly the same campaign. Like if you would have looked at it on the books and saw the leaderboards and everything, you'd think it was the same. And that's really where some of those small, the gameful design features that go into that, like playing those little games between shifts and recognizing people's achievements, that's where those really matter. That's where those really make the difference between, the whole points, badges, and leaderboards argument of, game design is more than that. And I think that really showed me, like looking at it in retrospect, how impactful some of those small details can be. And the good part of that story is I do still have a lot of friends that work there. I have a friend that's a manager there, and he has told me because I've expressed this grievance to him in the past, and he said they have gone back and they do take more care in their game design with that competition now. So they made a comeback. They learned their lesson, I think.
So engagers, I want you to take from this for sure. This is my key learning here, that just as well as you should iterate when you create something to improve it, you have to also make sure that you're not deteriorating your initial material. And it can happen. You can tinker with some things and it goes wrong. But that's precisely the point of iterating. You can see something going wrong and you go back to something else, or you try something new and different and see if it goes better. So my key learning here is that you have to remember to keep iterating, and testing and checking what's working and what's not. And always make sure that it doesn't mean that something, because it has, once again, as we've always said, points, badges, and leaderboards, it's gamification, and much less it's good gamification. Good gamification requires a lot of thought and many things and many elements that can be put together to create a great application of it. Scott, what do you think is the main learning from this lesson that you got?
Well, I think a lot of it is just communicating with your employees, communicating with your users, and kind of having empathy and understanding how they feel. I think it's easy, especially, and this is a great example of gamification too, because restaurants move fast, real fast. I mean, nobody has time. Management doesn't always have time to change course when you're in the middle of a busy season. and trying, even if you're busy, to take the time to talk to your users and find out how people feel about your program, about your gamification strategy, is always important. I mean, that needs to be you need to budget that in
Yeah. So
to your
talk to your
project.
users, right?
Yeah.
That's fundamental. Talk to your users, know your users as much as you can, and continue to communicate with them, because it's not just in the beginning, not just in the design. You have to make sure that when you iterate, if you're iterating, and that's fundamental, that you keep on the right track, and that requires of your users. So Scott,
Hmm.
let's shift a bit now and
Sure.
go into the next question, which is, what's the biggest challenge that you faced in your life and actually solved using gamification or game thinking?
Sure. So uh, I'll actually use an example from the achievements program for
Awesome.
that question. So when we first launched the program, we had a lot of students download the app. So the app's completely voluntary, by the way. It's not required of these students. So we had to kind of overcome the issue of marketing and getting students to join. And we were able to do that. We sent out some emails, messages, and everything. And we actually we had a cool program where we used. Are you familiar with Willy Wonka, the golden ticket?
Yeah.
So we actually physically created a letter with three golden tickets in it, and sent that out to students and told them, uh, "Here is your special pass. Since you're now a member, we had like 200 at the time. You have these three golden tickets. Give them to whoever you want, and they can join the app. Kind of like Gmail's campaign." And
Sure.
that was hugely effective. I think we like tripled our numbers. I think we got up to about 600 users after we did that.
Yikes.
Um, so that was a good way that we kind of overcame that challenge of getting people into the app. And then a different problem that arose was we had our users and they were completing achievements, and that was great, but we didn't have students buying items from the store. And that was a problem, in my opinion, because that was a huge part of what I felt was the core feedback loop of, we wanted students to do these things and get a reward, for their efforts, and then want to keep buying and keep doing achievements and understand the reward of their engagement. Well, when I had first made the awards, I had picked out the awards to be in the app. I wanted to put a lot of low ticket items in there so that there could be a quick feedback loop.
Okay.
So I had stuff in there, like T-shirts and even some smaller items like notepads and kind of like office items, because they're students, they might need those from the bookstore. Oh, I was wrong. They didn't buy any of that. Literally, I don't think an item was purchased under $10. And so we had to figure out what to do. And after talking to a lot of students, one of them finally told me, "Look, I already have all this stuff, and I don't even want to walk out of my dorm and into the bookstore to go pick up an eraser." you know,
It's
and
not worth the
so
effort.
yeah, exactly. So I was like, okay. It's like, well, what do you want? And so from talking to a few of the students, we got some more specialized rewards. Like we found some architecture equipment, like T squares and nursing kits, as well as some of the higher ticket items, like nice shirts that are like $50 or sweat or hoodies, as well as tech store items like iPad Minis and Fitbits. And
Wow.
and that was with me understanding, the way that I made the point structure, that it would take them a while to get that, but that drove students more. So students started completing more achievements because they were driven by those higher ticket
It
items.
was meaningful
And
for them, right?
yeah, it became more meaningful. And then what we're trying to do now that's been effective is we're adding experiences as well. So through the rec center, you can purchase. We have like yoga classes and Zumba classes, things like that, that are not free to students because they're like lead courses. And so now students can purchase their fit passes through the app, as well as they can purchase like rock climbing trips through outdoor pursuits. And we have a student run restaurant that has like a different menu every night of the week,
Wow.
with kind of high class cuisine kind of stuff. And so we started adding meal tickets for that, so you can buy dinner for one, two, or four
So
in the app.
basically,
That's been
here what you realized was that the rewards that you were giving, the feedback that you got was that the rewards were not meaningful. But something
Yeah.
I also wanted to point out, and I've heard Scott before because we met at Gamification World Congress about his app, is that you have to realize that all these items and all these things, they are meant to engage the students with the university. And again, the idea is that they do all these achievements to engage. But if they also go to the store and buy a hoodie that is from the university, of course it makes them more committed to the university. They feel identified. So you can see how this feedback loop goes into a spiral, a positive spiral, exactly of what you want to. So if you can find these effects somewhere in your application of gamification or game thinking, this is like a golden ticket, basically, just like Willy Wonka. I'm sure if
Yeah.
you can find that for your application, it's basically like a golden ticket. It's not always possible, that's true, and I'm very happy that you had this opportunity, Scott. But it's definitely I'm convinced that this is something that can improve the application and the engagement of your students, which is in the end the main objective, and you're sticking to your objectives and getting the best out of it. So congrats for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Scott. So now my next question has to do more with the process that you follow. We've spoken about how you arrived to your conclusions, how you used your feedback, but I wanted to know if you have any process that you follow when you're going to apply game thinking to a situation. What do you do when you want to solve a problem using game thinking?
Sure. So the first thing is always to do research. And a lot of this, isn't even particular to applying game thinking. It's just kind of, doing any kind of creative project in general. So, always start out with research, get on YouTube, get on the internet, talk to people that that are kind of working in the field, find case studies, see what they've done, and see what other people have done in that area. And then
and now
after
you will have the opportunity to listen to Professor Game, that you can have other cases and other people knowing what they've done. So sorry for that interruption, Scott.
No, yeah, absolutely, yeah. You should listen to Professor Games. Would be the first, the first research you do. So, after you do some initial research and kind of thinking on the topic, I think it's important to start with talking to potential users. Get to know your user group. Hopefully, ideally be a part of that user group if you can be, as much as you possibly can be. I was a student at Ball State, so that kind of helped, and a first generation student, Pell Grant student, everything like that. So, that kind of helped me with achievements.
Wow, of course.
And then once you have talked to them and kind of gotten to know them, I think it's important to start putting them into player types. Try to think, of the people that I talk to, what kind of players are they? What might be motivators for them? When I was talking to them about an idea, what got them excited? What were some of their suggestions on gameplay and mechanics and rewards? That usually blends into the next part, which would be free writing and free drawing. So I'll usually take those player types and then I'll just start kind of writing down words, writing down mechanics, ideas, drawing a little bit if I can. I'm not a great drawer, so I do more with words. And so, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's like very graphical to use the word. I mean, you don't have to physically draw. The idea is that you can express your thoughts somehow. We recently did a course on architecture, and they said you don't have to be a good drawer to be a good architect. You just need to be able to express what's in your head. And I think for you, it's exactly the same, whether that's in writing or whether that's drawing an ugly picture, which would be what I do, which is I'm a very bad drawer, just like you. The important thing is to be able to put it in paper so that you can, black and white, so you can see it and refer back to it and get it out of your head.
Yep, absolutely. So once I kind of have some doodles down and I have an idea of where I might want to go with it, I really like paper prototyping. Now, I don't usually do the literal cut it out of paper prototype. Some people do, and if you do, that's great. But I usually draw, a phone. Like for the app, I'll draw a phone and draw features, and I'll do the best that I can to kind of see how that works, and then I'll go bug one of my coworkers and show other people and ask them what they think, ask users what they think, get feedback, and then once I'm kind of happy with that, I will create a lo-fi prototype. And what I usually use for that, so what I mean by that is something that kind of sort of functions and might be kind of sort of digital. So, a little more concrete than a paper prototype. What I like to use is an app called Balsamiq. I don't know if you've heard of Balsamiq.
Yep. Mockups, right?
Okay. Yeah. It creates mock-ups, and you can actually make it interactive and link the screens together. So I'll usually do that. And then where that's helpful is, if you've ever worked with a designer or a developer, they need as much information as possible because so much can be misconstrued, and you're a different person than that person. And so creating that lo-fi prototype is very helpful for developers, even in just understanding how they're going to make your data structure for whatever you're trying to implement. So then we move from that to implementation usually, and then from there there's kind of a beta process of interviewing users, seeing what they think, getting their feedback, and then kind of wash, rinse, and repeat after that with iteration.
Makes a lot of sense. Iteration. Once again, that's a key thing to do with your products, engagers. Always make sure that you are iterating, that you're improving your product, because just like with the great tendency that they have now with startups, that you have to go with that minimum viable product and start improving. You never start improving. I mean, if you take a look at your phone every day, probably you'll get updates from the apps, and that's not just because they want to bug you. That's not because they just want to keep you in the top of mind. It's because they're actually at least trying to improve the product, and that's something that you can do as well. Make sure that you're iterating so that you can get to your goals, and you can do it better and more efficiently.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, Scott, so now we're going to go to the second part of the interview, and here I'm going to challenge you because I know that we both love this topic, and it's easy to go on a rant and spend all the time that we can speaking about this, but this is the second part. We're trying to go for short answers, all right? So I'm going to make you a few questions, and we're going to try to go for the quick short answers, all right? So the first answer I want from you is for you to name for us one best practice for gamification. What would you consider best practice?
I think one best practice would be to clearly identify your key performance indicators and your supporting metrics.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. That's a great thing because once you set your objective, you have to make sure you're on track. And the only way is to have performance indicators. So the key performance indicators are the ones that tell you, well, we are actually on track. So the next question would be, what's your favorite game?
So my favorite game I'm currently playing would be Hearthstone. I'm excited for the new expansion coming out. And then past games would be Final Fantasy VII, Diablo 2, and Disciples 2.
Well, sounds like you're such a gamer, huh?
Yes, yeah.
So the next thing I would like to know, and this is a question that we've made to everyone coming to the interviews, is who would you like to be interviewed? Who would you like to listen to in Professor Game?
Jane McGonigal.
Wow, that's a recurring answer.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll have her at some point for the interviews.
Yes.
What book would you recommend to our listeners?
So my favorite book ever is Cat's Cradle by Kurt Vonnegut. He's actually from Indiana. He's a Hoosier. It doesn't have anything to do with game design, but I'm still going to recommend it.
Great.
For game design, I'd say A Theory of Fun by Ralph Koster. It's a really good book with great illustrations on each page. Really easy read. Recommend that for game design, game theory. And then for a YouTube channel, I'm real big on YouTube, watching YouTube, that is. I don't have a channel. Game Maker's Toolkit by Mark Brown is excellent, as well as Ahoy. Ahoy is really good as well.
Okay, we'll put that on the show notes.
Sure.
Would you give us some advice for the players who have never engaged the learners through game thinking? What would you tell them?
Start small. I think it's really easy to get excited and make a huge campaign, a huge game that you want to make, and that's good to write down all of those ideas that you have. But start small, get a core feedback loop, and just do it. You just find users, talk to your friends, family, dogs, cats, whatever, and just do it and iterate, fail fast, see what happens, and write about it if you can. We need more postmortems. That's really what will help the industry as a whole. So
awesome. How would you use game thinking to approach this problem? And this problem that we're going to present to you is a question that comes from our audience, and it's selected randomly. We previously curated to make sure there's no There's no promotion or anything of the sort, that it's an actual question. So the question we have for you today, I'm going to check it here. Randomized, okay. So this is an engineering professor, all right? He says, I'm an engineering professor and I generally teach operations, optimization in particular. I'm struggling to get my students engaged in the class, and I must confess that I tend to be very theoretic except for some exercises. So he, in general, gives a lot of theory. Every once in a while, he does have a couple of exercises, but he still finds it hard for students to be excited about the topic. So he's asking us, how can I introduce gamification into my class? He's suggesting even that one of the classes he thinks could work for this is the one related to continuous improvement. So do you have any thoughts on that, Scott?
Yeah, and I've actually been thinking about that a lot here lately in general, how to use gamification in the classroom. And I think the real answer is that there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all answer because all students are different. And so, and students learn different, they are motivated differently. And so I think a good place to start, if you're able, is to take an inventory of your class very early on, get to know them, and figure out their player types. Find some kind of way to evaluate, what really motivates them. Because you may not have, I don't want to generalize too much, but I'm just going to say, since it's an engineering class, there may be more achievers rather than socializers in there. So, figure out what drives them at their core, and then take approaches based on that, rather than, we're going to make this. For instance, if you're in an art class, who will probably have a lot of explorers, a lot of creative types, you probably don't want to make that a competition. You probably won't. It won't be effective to say, okay, you're all competing with each other, and that's how we're going to become engaged in the classroom. You would probably want to allow for more side quest type activities, type game design, if you've got a classroom full of explorers. So I think the first step is identifying your particular class, finding a way to do that, and then trying to alter what you're going to do by after finding those results. Now, I don't have a great answer. I know that makes it
no, but that's the start of the process, and that's fundamental. Where do you start? You start by knowing your players. You start by knowing your users, your learners. So that's actually great advice. If you start up by there, and let's assume, for example, that it's true that what you said, that they tend to be achievers. So what techniques, maybe general game mechanics, would you suggest for achievers if it were the case?
So for achievers often they like to see experience bars filled. They're the completionists of the player types. So you're going to want to find a way to visually show them where they are. Like they want to know where they are on the scale, and they want to see the finish line. And so doing that as well as possible, I think, is a way that you can kind of motivate them. And sometimes you don't even necessarily have to change the structure of your class, like how you're teaching it. It's just a matter of giving meaningful feedback in a way that motivates them in a more meaningful way.
That's great. That's great, Scott. So finally, I'd like to know, for you to give our audience how we can connect with you, some final piece of quick advice, and then we'll say game over.
Sure. So you can find me on Twitter at Scott Reinke, as well as you can email me anytime at smreinke@bsu.edu. And my final word of advice, especially for I think there's a lot of people that are interested in gamification and game design now that aren't necessarily in the field or aren't really gamers quite yet. And my advice would be to play games, to play as many and as diverse games as possible, because if you ask anyone, how do you become a better writer, they tell you to read. They tell you to study what other people have done. So just be mindful of the games that you play. Think about what the creator was thinking when they made it, and just play games.
Great advice. So become a gamer, a bit of a gamer at least, to understand games better. Especially even if you are not a video game player, I would suggest as well that you play some games, even if you want just to analyze them, to get the best out of them, and to use something like gamification, which is using all these techniques, all the things that were used to engage the people on a game, you can use it for something else, for example, for your classroom. So thank you very much, Scott, for joining us here at Professor Game. And well, it's time to say game over. Bye-bye, Scott.
Bye, thanks.
Engagers, thank you for listening to Professor Game Podcast. If you want more interviews with incredible guests like Scott and lots of awesomeness from Professor Game, take a minute to subscribe and rate this podcast on iTunes. You can find a direct link on professorgame.com/iTunes. Why iTunes? Because this will help us reach other engagers who will be your allies to make education amazing using gamification. Hey, and by the way, if you like the show and want a free gift, then subscribe, give us a 5-star rating and a positive review on iTunes. Then send a screenshot where you show this to professor@professorgame.com with review gift in the subject line, and we'll send it to you. Before you click continue for your next mission, would you like to know what a gamification conference looks like? We will be talking about Gamification Europe on a special episode next week. We'll have Pete Jenkins from the Gamification Confederation and Gamification Plus. Listen to the next episode of Professor Game next week. See you there!